In the quiet farming community of Millers Creek, Pennsylvania, where Amish and English neighbors have coexisted for generations, a devastating house fire on a stormy October night will forever change the lives of everyone involved. When 50-year-old Amish carpenter Samuel Yoder discovers a 12-year-old girl and her injured puppy in the burning remains of an abandoned farmhouse, he has no idea that his act of compassion will uncover a web of secrets, lost family connections, and a heartbreaking truth that will unite an entire community in ways they never imagined. This is a story of faith, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds that form when strangers become family. The storm had been brewing all day, with dark clouds rolling across the Pennsylvania countryside like a gray blanket being pulled over the world. Samuel Yoder had felt it in his bones, the way his grandfather used to say he could feel weather coming. At 50 years old, Samuel had spent most of his life working with his hands, building homes and barns for both his Amish community and their English neighbors in Millers Creek. His weathered face and calloused palms told the story of decades spent in honest labor, guided by the simple faith that had been passed down through generations of Yoders. That October evening, as Samuel made his way home from the Stoltzfus barn raising, the first drops of rain began to spatter against the windshield of his horse-drawn buggy. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and his mare, Bessie, pricked her ears nervously at the sound. Samuel reached forward to pat her neck reassuringly. "Easy, girl," he murmured in Pennsylvania Dutch, the gentle dialect of his people. "We'll be home soon enough." But as they rounded the bend near the old Hartwell place, a farmhouse that had stood empty for nearly 3 years since old Miss Hartwell passed, Samuel saw something that made his heart skip a beat. Orange flames were licking at the windows of the 2-story house, and thick black smoke was pouring from the roof. "Whoa!" Samuel called out, pulling Bessie to a stop. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The Hartwell place was supposed to be empty. The family had moved away after the funeral, and the house had been sitting vacant ever since. But fires didn't start themselves, especially not on nights like this. Samuel quickly tied Bessie's reins to a fence post and ran toward the burning building. The heat hit him like a wall as he got closer, and the acrid smell of burning wood filled his nostrils. Through the smoke and flames, he could hear something that made his blood run cold, a sound that seemed impossible but unmistakable. A child was crying, not the wailing of someone in immediate danger, but the softer, more heartbreaking sound of someone who was scared and alone. Samuel didn't hesitate, despite the flames and the danger, despite the fact that his own family would be worried about him. He pushed through the broken front door of the farmhouse. "Hello," he called out, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped for a moment, replaced by a small, frightened voice. "Here, I'm here." Samuel followed the sound, covering his mouth with his shirt sleeve as he made his way through the smoke-filled rooms. The fire hadn't reached the back of the house yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. In what must have been the kitchen, he found them. A small girl with tangled brown hair and tear-stained cheeks, clutching a golden retriever puppy that appeared to be unconscious. The girl looked up at Samuel with eyes that seemed far too old for her 12 years. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and she was shivering despite the heat from the approaching flames. The puppy in her arms was breathing, but barely. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "Please don't leave us." Samuel's heart broke at the sight. Without a second thought, he scooped the girl and her puppy into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. He noticed too light for a child her age. "I've got you," he said firmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had never broken a promise. "You're safe now." Getting out of the house proved more difficult than getting in. The fire had spread, blocking their original path, and Samuel had to find another way through the maze of smoke and flames. The girl buried her face against his shoulder, still clutching her puppy, and Samuel could feel her trembling. "What's your name?" he asked, as he navigated around a fallen beam, trying to keep her mind off their dangerous situation. "Lucy," she whispered. "Lucy Harper. And this is Goldie." "Well, Lucy Harper, I'm Samuel Yoder, and I'm going to get you and Goldie out of here safely. Can you trust me to do that?" Lucy nodded against his shoulder, and Samuel felt the weight of that trust settle on him like a mantle. This child had been through something terrible, that much was clear, and now her safety was in his hands. They finally burst through a side door just as the roof began to collapse behind them. Samuel carried Lucy and Goldie away from the burning house, not stopping until they were well beyond the reach of the flames. Only then did he set them down gently on the grass, his lungs burning from the smoke. Lucy immediately turned her attention to her puppy, whose breathing seemed more labored now. "Goldie won't wake up," she said, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. The smoke, there was so much smoke. Samuel knelt beside them, his experienced hands checking the puppy with the same care he would show any injured creature. Goldie was alive, but she needed help, and soon, "We need to get Goldie to Mitchell," Samuel said, referring to the English veterinarian who served both communities in Miller's Creek. "And we need to get you somewhere warm and safe." Lucy looked up at him with those two old eyes. "Are you going to call the police? Are you going to send me back?" The question hit Samuel like a physical blow. Send her back where? And why was this child so afraid of the very people who should be protecting her? "Right now," Samuel said carefully, "I'm going to take care of you and Goldie. That's all that mattered." As if summoned by the drama, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The volunteer fire department from town would arrive soon, followed by questions that Samuel wasn't sure Lucy was ready to answer. He made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Lucy," he said, helping her to her feet, "how would you feel about coming home with me tonight? My wife Rachel makes the best soup in the county, and we have a warm bed where you can rest while Goldie gets better." Lucy searched his face, looking for something honesty perhaps, or the kind of trustworthiness that couldn't be faked. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her. "You promise you won't send me away?" she asked. "I promise," Samuel said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As they walked toward his buggy, Lucy carrying her unconscious puppy and Samuel's strong arm around her shoulders, neither of them knew that this moment would be talked about in Miller's Creek for years to come. They didn't know that Lucy's story would touch the hearts of an entire community, or that the truth about how she came to be in that burning house would shake the very foundations of trust that small towns are built on. All Samuel knew was that a child had needed help, and he had been there to provide it. It was, he would later reflect, exactly what his faith had taught him to do. But as he helped Lucy into his buggy and urged Bessie toward home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than a simple rescue. The storm was getting worse, and behind them the Hartwell house continued to burn, taking with it whatever secrets it might have held about how Lucy Harper and her puppy had come to be there on this fateful night. But some secrets, Samuel would soon learn, have a way of refusing to stay buried, especially when they involve the innocence of a child and the courage of a community determined to protect what matters most. The Yoder farmhouse sat nestled in a grove of maple trees, its white clapboard siding and green shutters barely visible through the driving rain. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, creating a beacon of comfort against the dark October night. As Samuel guided Bessie up the gravel drive, Lucy pressed her face to the buggy window, still clutching Goldie's limp form. "Is she?" Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. Samuel reached over and gently placed his finger against the puppy's chest. The tiny heartbeat was there, weak but steady. "She's still with us, child. Dr. Mitchell will know what to do." The front door of the farmhouse opened before they even reached the porch, and Rachel Yoder appeared in the doorway. At 46, Samuel's wife was a woman whose gentle strength had weathered 24 years of marriage, the joy of raising 4 children, and the quiet sorrows that life brings to all families. Her graying brown hair was neatly pinned beneath her white prayer cap, and her blue dress was protected by a practical apron. But it was her eyes, warm, compassionate eyes that had comforted countless children and neighbors over the years, that Lucy noticed first. Samuel, Rachel called out, stepping onto the porch despite the rain. We heard the sirens. Is everything? She stopped mid-sentence as Samuel helped Lucy down from the buggy, the unconscious puppy still in her arm. This is Lucy Harper, Samuel said quietly, his hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. And this is Goldie. They were in the old Hartwell place when it caught fire. Rachel's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She rushed forward, not caring about the rain soaking through her dress. "Oh, you poor dear," she murmured, taking in Lucy's soot-stained face and too-thin frame. "Come inside, both of you. Samuel, we need to call Dr. Mitchell right away." The warmth of the Yoder home enveloped Lucy like a gentle embrace. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with its large wooden tables surrounded by mismatched chairs, each one telling the story of a family that had gathered here for countless meals. The cast-iron stove radiated heat, and the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. Quilts made by Rachel's mother and grandmother hung on the walls, their intricate patterns speaking of generations of love stitched into every thread. Lucy stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from danger to safety, from cold and fear to warmth and kindness. She had been in so many houses over the years, some kind, some indifferent, some cruel, but none had ever felt like this. None had ever felt like home. "Let's get you both taken care of," Rachel said, guiding Lucy to a chair by the stove. She knelt down to Lucy's level, her voice soft and reassuring. "Can I look at Goldie for you while Samuel calls the doctor?" Lucy hesitated, her arms tightening around her puppy. Goldie was all she had in the world, the only constant in a life that had been filled with uncertainty and abandonment. The thought of letting anyone else touch her, even these kind people, made her chest tight with panic. Samuel seemed to understand. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he did when approaching a frightened animal. "Lucy," he said quietly, "Rachel raised 4 children and helped birth more puppies and kittens than you could count. Goldie will be safe with her." Something in his voice, the same steadiness that had carried her out of the burning house, made Lucy nod. With trembling hands, she placed Goldie in Rachel's lap. Rachel's experienced hands moved over the puppy with gentle efficiency. "She's breathing better already, away from all that smoke," she observed. "But she needs proper care." Samuel was already at the phone, dialing Dr. Mitchell's number. The conversation was brief, but urgent. "He's on his way," Samuel announced, hanging up the receiver. He said to keep her warm and watch her breathing. While they waited for the veterinarian, Rachel worked her quiet magic. She brought Lucy a warm washcloth to clean the soot from her face and hands, then wrapped her in a quilt that smelled of lavender and sunshine. A bowl of chicken soup appeared, along with thick slices of fresh bread slathered with butter and honey. Lucy ate slowly at first, as if she wasn't quite sure the food wouldn't be taken away. But as the warm soup filled her empty stomach and the kindness of her hosts became apparent, she began to relax slightly. "How long has it been since you've had a proper meal?" Rachel asked gently, refilling Lucy's bowl without being asked. Lucy looked down at her hands. "I had some crackers yesterday, and I found an apple behind Miller's grocery store day before that." The simple statement hit both Samuel and Rachel like a physical blow. This child had been living on scraps, fending for herself in ways that no 12-year-old should have to endure. "Where are your parents, Lucy?" Samuel asked carefully, settling into the chair across from her. Lucy's shoulders tensed, and she didn't look up from her soup. "I don't have parents, not anymore." "What about other family? Grandparents, aunts or uncles?" "There's nobody." Her voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a child who had learned not to hope for too much. "There's just me and Goldie." Rachel and Samuel exchanged a look over Lucy's head, a silent conversation that came from years of marriage and shared faith. They both knew there was more to this story, but pushing too hard too soon would only frighten her further. Dr. Mitchell arrived 20 minutes later, his truck splashing through the puddles in the driveway. Thomas Mitchell was a man in his 60s who had been caring for animals in Miller's Creek for over 30 years. He had delivered countless foals, saved sick cattle, and mended the broken hearts of children whose pets needed his help. His presence in the Yoder kitchen brought with it an air of competent reassurance. "Let's see what we have here," he said, kneeling beside Goldie, who was now resting on a blanket near the warm stove. Lucy hovered anxiously nearby as Dr. Mitchell conducted his examination. The puppy stirred under his gentle touch, letting out a small whimper that made Lucy's face light up with the first real smile Samuel had seen from her. "Good news," Dr. Mitchell announced. "She suffered some smoke inhalation, but her lungs sound clear. Puppies are remarkably resilient. With some rest and care, she should make a full recovery." Lucy dropped to her knees beside Goldie, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, stroking the puppy's golden fur. "We're both going to be okay." Dr. Mitchell left some medication and instructions for care, refusing payment despite Samuel's insistence. "Just take good care of them both," he said quietly, as he prepared to leave. "That little girl has been through something terrible. Anyone can see that. She's lucky she found you folks." After the doctor left, the kitchen fell into a comfortable quiet. The storm outside was beginning to ease, but Lucy showed no signs of wanting to go anywhere. She sat on the floor next to Goldie, who was now sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and strong. "Lucy," Rachel said gently, "would you like to stay here tonight? We have a spare room upstairs where you and Goldie can rest." Lucy looked up, hope and fear warring in her expression. "You mean it? You won't call anyone tonight?" Samuel knelt down beside her. "Child, I don't know what you're running from, but I can see you're scared. Nobody's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. Not tonight." "But what about tomorrow?" Lucy asked, the question revealing so much about her young life. The temporary nature of kindness she had experienced, the uncertainty that seemed to follow her everywhere. Rachel reached out and tucked a strand of Lucy's hair behind her ear, the gesture so natural and motherly that it brought fresh tears to the girl's eyes. "Tomorrow," Rachel said softly, "we'll face together. Right now you need sleep, and Goldie needs to recover. Everything else can wait until the morning sun." As Rachel led Lucy upstairs to the small bedroom that had once belonged to their youngest daughter, now grown and married with children of her own, Samuel stood in the kitchen doorway watching them go. The little girl who had appeared out of a burning house was carrying more than just an injured puppy. She was carrying secrets, pain, and a fear that spoke of experiences no child should have to endure. Samuel walked to the window and looked out at the last of the storm clouds moving across the star-filled sky. In the distance he could still see the faint glow from the ruins of the Hartwell house. By morning there would be questions from the fire department, possibly from the police. People would want to know how Lucy had come to be in that house, and why she was so afraid of being sent back to wherever she had come from. But tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she was part of their family, even if only temporarily. And as Samuel turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs to where Rachel was helping Lucy settle into the guest room, he made a silent promise to the God he had served faithfully all his life. Whatever Lucy Harper's story was, whatever had brought her to that burning house on this stormy night, she would not face it alone. The Yoder family would stand with her, no matter what tomorrow might bring. In the guest room, Lucy lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks. Goldie curled up beside her on the soft quilt. The puppy's breathing was strong and even now, and Lucy's own breathing began to match it, as sleep finally claimed her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Lucy Harper felt safe. But in the back of her mind, even as she drifted off to sleep, she knew that safety was often temporary. She had learned that lesson the hard way, over and over again. What she didn't know was that Samuel and Rachel Yoder were the kind of people who turned temporary into permanent, who built bridges out of kindness and walls out of fierce protection for those they loved. The storm had passed, but the real test of this newfound family was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and misty over Miller's Creek, the air still heavy with the scent of rain and something else, the lingering smell of smoke from the ruins of the Hartwell place. Samuel had been awake since 5, as was his custom, but this morning he found himself moving more quietly than usual through his morning chores. Upstairs, Lucy and Goldie were still sleeping, and he didn't want to disturb the first peaceful rest the child had probably had in weeks. Rachel was already in the kitchen when he came in from milking the cows, her hands busy kneading dough for the day's bread. She looked up as he entered, her eyes reflecting the same concern that had kept them both awake much of the night. "How is Samuel?" asked quietly, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "I checked on her an hour ago. Still sleeping, with that puppy right beside her." "Samuel," Rachel paused in her kneading flour, dusting her apron. "That child hasn't just been hungry. Look at her clothes, they're worn thin, and they don't fit right. And did you see her shoes? There are holes in the soles." Samuel had noticed. He'd also noticed the way Lucy had eaten last night, quickly, protectively, as if someone might take the food away at any moment. It spoke of a life lived in uncertainty, of a child who had learned not to trust that kindness would last. "There's more to her story," he said, settling at the kitchen table with his coffee. "The question is, what do we do when folks start asking questions?" As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached their ears. Through the window, Samuel could see Sheriff Tom Bradley's patrol car, followed by Fire Chief Danny Morrison's red pickup truck. Both men had been friends of the Yoder family for years, but their presence this morning meant official business. "I'll go talk to them outside," Samuel said, not wanting the conversation to wake Lucy. "You keep an eye on her." Sheriff Bradley was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that had made him popular in Miller's Creek. He'd grown up with Samuel, gone to the English school while Samuel had attended the one-room Amish schoolhouse, but they'd remained friends across the cultural divide that sometimes separated their communities. "Morning, Sam," Sheriff Bradley said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you so early, but we need to talk about last night." Fire Chief Morrison nodded his greeting. Danny was younger, maybe 40, with the serious demeanor of a man who'd seen too many preventable tragedies. "The Hartwell place burned to the ground," he reported. "We found evidence that someone had been living there, makeshift bedding in the back room, empty food cans. You said you found a child." Samuel chose his words carefully. "A little girl, maybe 12 years old, and her puppy. The puppy had breathed too much smoke, but Dr. Mitchell said she'll be fine." "Where's the girl now?" Sheriff Bradley asked, his tone gentle but official. "Inside, sleeping." She was exhausted and frightened. The sheriff and fire chief exchanged glances. "Sam, we're going to need to talk to her," Sheriff Bradley said. "A child that age, living alone in an abandoned house. We need to know where she came from, whether there are parents looking for her." Samuel felt the weight of his promise to Lucy pressing against his chest. He'd told her no one would take her anywhere she didn't want to go, but he also knew these men were just doing their jobs, trying to protect her in their own way. "She's scared," Samuel said finally, "terrified of being sent back somewhere. I don't know where, but whatever happened to her before, it wasn't good." Fire Chief Morrison frowned. "Could be a runaway from the foster system. Happens more than people think. Kids get placed in bad situations, they run." "Or she could be a missing person," Sheriff Bradley added. "We'll need to check the databases, see if anyone's reported a Lucy Harper missing." The sound of the front door opening interrupted their conversation. Lucy appeared on the porch, fully dressed, but still looking small and vulnerable in the morning light. Goldie was in her arms, the puppy alert and wagging her tail, a vast improvement from the night before. Lucy's eyes immediately fixed on the sheriff and fire chief, and Samuel could see her entire body tense with fear. She took a step backward, as if preparing to run. "It's all right, Lucy," Samuel said quickly, moving to stand between her and the officials. "These are friends. Sheriff Bradley and Chief Morrison just want to make sure you're okay." Sheriff Bradley removed his hat and crouched down to Lucy's level, a gesture that spoke of years of experience dealing with frightened children. Hello, Lucy, I'm Tom Bradley. I'm the sheriff here in Miller's Creek. Mr. Yoder tells me you had a scary night. Lucy didn't respond, but she didn't run either. She stood frozen, clutching Goldie like a lifeline. We just want to help, Sheriff Bradley continued gently. Can you tell me how you came to be in that old house? For a long moment, Lucy said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I was just trying to find somewhere warm to sleep. The door was unlocked. Where did you come from, honey? Where are your parents? Lucy's grip on Goldie tightened. I don't have parents. What about other family? Grandparents? Anyone who might be worried about you? There's nobody, Lucy said, the same flat tone she'd used the night before. There's just me and Goldie. Fire Chief Morrison stepped forward. Lucy, that house wasn't safe. The wiring was old. Probably what started the fire. You could have been seriously hurt. I didn't mean to start a fire, Lucy said quickly, panic rising in her voice. I was just cold, and I found some matches, and I thought maybe I could light a little fire in the fireplace. But easy, Samuel interjected, his voice calm and reassuring. Nobody's blaming you for anything. Accidents happen. Sheriff Bradley made some notes in his pad. Lucy, I need to ask you some questions about where you've been living, how long you've been on your own. It's not to get you in trouble, it's to help us figure out how to keep you safe. Lucy looked at Samuel, her eyes pleading. He could see the trust she'd begun to place in him, warring with her deep-seated fear of authority figures. What if, Samuel began carefully, what if Lucy stayed here with us while you do your checking? She's been through a trauma, and she needs time to recover. So does her puppy. Sheriff Bradley considered this. Sam, you know I respect you and Rachel, but this isn't just about good intentions. If this child is in the system, if there are people looking for her, then we'll deal with that when we know more, Samuel said firmly. But right now she needs stability and care. We can provide that. Lucy stepped closer to Samuel, hope flickering in her eyes. Rachel appeared in the doorway, having heard the conversation from inside. Sheriff Bradley, Rachel said, wiping her hands on her apron. You know Samuel and I raised 4 children. We've taken in strays before, both the 4-legged and 2-legged kind. Lucy needs a safe place to heal, not more upheaval. The sheriff looked at the scene before him, the frightened child, the protective Amish couple, the puppy who was clearly the girl's most precious possession. His years of experience told him there was much more to this story than what he was seeing, but his heart told him that Lucy Harper was exactly where she needed to be, at least for now. All right, he said finally, but I need to run her name through the system, and if we find out she's supposed to be somewhere else, we'll have to follow protocol. Lucy's face went pale. What does that mean? It means, Samuel said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, that we're going to take things one day at a time. Right now, you're safe. Goldie is getting better, and that's all that matters. After the sheriff and fire chief left with promises to check back soon, Lucy sat at the kitchen table picking at the breakfast Rachel had prepared for her. Her appetite seemed to have disappeared with the arrival of the officials. Lucy, Rachel said gently, settling beside her with a cup of tea, can you tell us a little more about yourself, where you've been living, how long you've been on your own? Lucy was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she might not answer. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. I was in foster care, she said. Different houses, different families, some were okay, some weren't. She paused, stroking Goldie's soft fur. The last place, Mr. and Hendricks, they weren't nice people. They only took in kids for the money. Rachel's hand moved to cover Lucy's smaller one. What happened there, sweetheart? They had too many kids in a house that was too small. Never enough food. And Mr. Hendricks, he got angry a lot. Really angry. Lucy's voice dropped even lower. When I found Goldie as a puppy behind the grocery store, Mrs. Hendricks said I couldn't keep her, said they weren't running a zoo. But Goldie was so little, and she needed me. Samuel felt his jaw clench. He'd seen enough of the world to know that not all foster families were motivated by love and genuine care for children. So you ran away? Rachel asked gently. Lucy nodded. 3 weeks ago, I took Goldie and some food from the kitchen, and we left at night. I've been trying to find somewhere safe ever since. That old house seemed perfect. Nobody bothered us there, and there was a stream nearby for water." The simple recitation of her survival efforts, a 12-year-old child caring for herself and a puppy, living rough for weeks, brought tears to Rachel's eyes. "Lucy," Samuel said carefully, "when Sheriff Bradley checks the system, he's going to find out about the Hendricks family. They might have reported you as a runaway." Fear flashed across Lucy's face. "You won't send me back there, will you? Please, I'll work hard. I'll help with chores. I won't be any trouble. Just please don't send me back there." The desperation in her voice broke both Samuel's and Rachel's hearts. Here was a child who had been failed by the very system meant to protect her, who had been forced to become resourceful and independent in ways that no 12-year-old should have to be. "Nobody's sending you anywhere," Rachel said firmly, pulling Lucy into a gentle embrace. "You're part of our family now, for as long as you need to be." Samuel nodded his agreement, even as he wondered what complications that promise might bring. But looking at Lucy, really looking at this brave, scared, resilient child who had risked everything to protect a puppy, he knew they were making the right choice. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, but inside the Yoder kitchen, a different kind of storm was brewing. One made up of bureaucracy and legal complications, of a system that didn't always know how to handle children who fell through the cracks. But Samuel and Rachel Yoder had weathered many storms in their 24 years of marriage, and they were prepared to weather this one too, no matter what it might bring. For Lucy Harper, and for the golden puppy who had led her to safety, they would stand as guardians against whatever forces might try to tear this fragile new family apart. The questions would come, and the secrets would eventually be revealed. But love, Samuel had learned over the years, was often the strongest shelter against life's storms. And this child, this brave little girl who had saved her puppy from a burning house, deserved nothing less than the fierce protection that love could provide. 3 days had passed since the fire, and Lucy was beginning to settle into the rhythm of life at the Yoder farm. She helped Rachel with the morning chores, fed the chickens with careful precision, and spent hours in the barn with Samuel, learning about the horses and watching him work on a cabinet he was building for an English family in town. Goldie had made a complete recovery and had become the farm's unofficial shadow, following Lucy everywhere with the devoted loyalty that only a rescued animal could show. But beneath the peaceful surface, tension was building. Sheriff Bradley had called twice, and each time Samuel could see Lucy's face grow pale with worry. The bureaucratic wheels were turning, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to face whatever the system had in store for Lucy Harper. That reckoning came on a crisp Thursday morning in the form of an unexpected visitor. Samuel was teaching Lucy how to properly care for the horses when they heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the barn door they could see a small blue sedan with government plates, and Lucy's entire body went rigid with fear. "It's okay," Samuel said quickly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together." The woman who emerged from the car was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and a briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. She wore the kind of practical clothing and serious expression that immediately identified her as someone from social service. Lucy took an instinctive step backward, moving closer to Samuel. "That's Mrs. Crawford," Lucy whispered, her voice filled with dread. "She's my caseworker. She's the one who placed me with the Hendricks." Samuel felt a surge of protective anger, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "Remember what I promised you, Lucy. Nobody takes you anywhere you don't want to go." Margaret Crawford approached the barn with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. She was accompanied by Sheriff Bradley, whose presence seemed more apologetic than official. "Lucy Harper," Mrs. Crawford called out, her voice carrying the authority of bureaucracy. "I need you to come with me immediately. You've caused quite a lot of trouble running away like that." Lucy shrank back against Samuel, and Goldie sensed her distress, moving to stand protectively between the girl and the approaching adults. "Mrs. Crawford," Sheriff Bradley said quietly, Perhaps we could discuss this situation before making any decisions. The Yoders have been taking excellent care of Lucy. The Yoders, Mrs. Crawford said sharply, are not licensed foster parents. Lucy is a ward of the state, and she belongs in an approved placement. The Hendricks family has been very worried about her. Samuel stepped forward, his usually gentle demeanor hardening with protective resolve. Ma'am, with all due respect, this child has told us about her treatment at the Hendricks home. If they were so worried, why didn't they report the conditions that made her feel she had to run away? Mrs. Crawford's eyes flashed with irritation. Mr. Yoder, you don't understand the complexities of the foster care system. Children often fabricate stories when they're unhappy with necessary discipline. The Hendricks are experienced foster parents who have taken in dozens of children over the years. And how many of those children have run away? Rachel's voice came from behind them. She had approached from the house, drawn by the sound of raised voices, and her usually serene expression was replaced by something Samuel recognized as maternal fury. That's not relevant, Mrs. Crawford replied curtly. What's relevant is that Lucy needs to return to her proper placement immediately. Lucy found her voice, though it shook with emotion. I won't go back there. You can't make me go back there. Mrs. Crawford softened her tone slightly, but the underlying steel remained. Lucy, I know change is difficult, but you can't just run away every time you're unhappy. The Hendricks have agreed to take you back, despite all the trouble you've caused. Trouble? Samuel's voice carried a dangerous edge. This child was trying to survive. She was hungry, cold and alone for weeks, because she was more afraid of going back to that house than she was of living on the streets. What does that tell you about the care she was receiving? Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat uncomfortably. Margaret, maybe we should investigate Lucy's claims before making any hasty decisions. If there were problems at the Hendricks home, there were no problems, Mrs. Crawford interrupted. I've personally inspected that home multiple times. It meets all state requirements. Lucy stepped out from behind Samuel, her young face set with a determination that belied her 12 years. Meeting requirements isn't the same as being kind, she said quietly. Meeting requirements doesn't mean there's enough food or that nobody yells at you for crying when you're scared. The simple dignity of her words seemed to catch Mrs. Crawford off guard, but she quickly recovered her official composure. Regardless of your feelings, Lucy, you're a minor in state custody. You don't get to choose where you live. What if there was another option? Rachel interjected, moving to stand beside her husband. What if Lucy could stay here while the situation is properly investigated? Mrs. Crawford shook her head. As I said, you're not licensed foster parents. The state can't place a child with unlicensed caregivers. Then we'll get licensed, Samuel said without hesitation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Crawford looked taken aback by the sudden offer, while Lucy's eyes filled with hope for the first time since the caseworker had arrived. The licensing process takes months, Miss Crawford said. Background checks, home inspections, training courses, and there's no guarantee you'd be approved. Your lifestyle might not be considered suitable for a child from outside your community. The barely concealed prejudice in her voice made Sheriff Bradley wince. He'd grown up with the Amish community, knew the Yoder family personally, and understood the depth of love and stability they could provide. Mrs. Crawford, the sheriff said diplomatically, the Yoders are respected members of this community. They raised 4 children of their own, all of whom have become productive, caring adults. Surely temporary placement with them, while the licensing process proceeds, would be in Lucy's best interest. Miss Crawford consulted her clipboard, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. I suppose, temporarily, until proper arrangements can be made. No, Lucy said suddenly, her voice stronger than anyone had heard it before. Not temporarily. I want to stay here. Really stay here. Forever. She looked up at Samuel and Rachel with eyes that held both hope and terror. Hope that they truly meant their offer, terror that it might be taken away. Rachel knelt down to Lucy's level, taking the girl's hands in her own. "Lucy, if you want to stay with us, really stay with us, then we'll move heaven and earth to make that happen. But you have to understand, it means becoming part of our family in every way. Our faith, our community, our way of life." "I understand," Lucy said without hesitation. "I've never had a real family before. I've never had a place where I belonged. If you'll have me, I want to be a Yoder." The simple declaration brought tears to Rachel's eyes and a fierce protectiveness to Samuel's heart. Here was a child who had been failed by the system, who had lived by her wits and courage, asking not just for shelter, but for belonging. Mrs. Crawford, clearly realizing she was losing control of the situation, fell back on bureaucratic authority. "This is highly irregular. There are procedures, protocols that must be followed." "Then let's follow them," Samuel said firmly. "But Lucy stays here while we do. She's been through enough upheaval." Sheriff Bradley nodded his agreement. "Margaret, you know as well as I do that the state's first priority is supposed to be the child's best interest. Lucy is clearly thriving here. She's safe, well cared for, and for the first time in her life she feels like she belongs somewhere." Mrs. Crawford looked around at the faces surrounding her. The determined Amish couple, the sympathetic sheriff, and the child whose quiet strength had impressed even her bureaucratic heart. Finally, she sighed. "I'll need to file a report recommending temporary emergency placement," she said reluctantly. "The licensing process will have to begin immediately. There will be inspections, interviews, background checks. And if at any point the state determines that this placement is not suitable, it will be," Rachel said with quiet confidence. "We'll make sure of it." After Mrs. Crawford left with her paperwork and her reservations, the Yoder family, for that's what they had become in that moment, sat around the kitchen table in contemplative silence. The magnitude of what they had committed to was beginning to sink in. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel asked Lucy gently. "Living Amish means giving up a lot of things that English children take for granted. Television, modern music, fancy clothes." Lucy looked around the simple kitchen that had become more of a home to her in 3 days than any place she'd ever lived. "I never had those things anyway," she said. "But I never had people who cared about me either. I never had someone who would stand up for me when I was scared." She paused, stroking Goldie, who was curled in her lap. "Besides, Goldie likes it here. She's never had a real home either." That evening, as Samuel sat on the porch watching Lucy and Goldie play in the yard, Rachel joined him on the wooden swing he'd built when their own children were young. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" she asked softly, though there was no regret in her voice. Samuel watched Lucy throw a stick for Goldie, marveling at how much the child had changed in just a few days. The hunched shoulders and fearful glances were giving way to something that looked almost like childhood joy. "We've gotten ourselves a daughter," he said simply, "one who was brave enough to save her puppy from a burning house, resourceful enough to survive on her own for weeks, and strong enough to ask for what she needs." Rachel smiled, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "The licensing process won't be easy. They'll question everything about our lifestyle, our faith, our ability to raise a child who wasn't born into our community. Then we'll show them," Samuel replied. "We'll show them that love doesn't require a license, that family isn't just about blood, and that sometimes the best homes are the ones that welcome strays." In the yard, Lucy's laughter carried on the evening breeze, a sound that neither Samuel nor Rachel had heard from her before. It was the sound of a child who was finally learning what it meant to be safe, to be wanted, to belong. The bureaucratic battles ahead would be challenging, and there would be those who questioned whether an Amish family could properly care for an English child. But as Samuel and Rachel watched Lucy and Goldie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, they knew they had made the right choice. Sometimes families are born, sometimes they're chosen, and sometimes, as in the case of Lucy Harper and her golden puppy, they're forged in the flames of adversity and tempered by the strength of unconditional love. The hardest part of their journey was still ahead, but for tonight they were simply a family learning to be together. And in the gentle peace of a Pennsylvania evening, with the sound of a child's laughter filling the air. That was more than enough. The licensing process proved to be even more complicated than Samuel and Rachel had anticipated. Over the next 2 weeks, their home was invaded by a parade of social workers, inspectors, and bureaucrats, each with their own clipboards and concerns about placing an English child with an Amish family. Lucy watched these proceedings with growing anxiety, clinging to Goldie and retreating into the quiet spaces of the farm whenever strangers arrived. It was during one of these inspections, a particularly intrusive visit from a state child welfare supervisor, that the first real crisis struck. Lucy had been helping Rachel with the laundry when they heard raised voices from the parlor where Samuel was meeting with the officials. "Mr. Yoder, I have to be frank with you," came the stern voice of Dr. Patricia Fleming, the state supervisor. "Your lifestyle, while admirable in its own way, may not provide the educational and social opportunities that a modern child requires. No television, limited interaction with peers outside your community, restricted access to contemporary educational resources. With respect, Dr. Fleming." Samuel's voice remained calm, but carried an edge of steel. "We have successfully raised 4 children who are now productive members of society. Our oldest son runs a successful furniture business that employs 12 people. Our daughter is a teacher who—" "Yes, but they were born into your community," Dr. Fleming interrupted. "Lucy Harper has different needs, different expectations based on her background. Forcing her to conform to such a restrictive lifestyle could be considered a form of cultural suppression." Lucy, who had been listening from the kitchen, felt her heart sink. These people didn't understand. They saw only restrictions where she saw safety, only limitations where she saw love. Rachel must have sensed her distress because she appeared at Lucy's side, placing a comforting arm around the girl's shoulders. "They don't understand," Rachel whispered softly. "They think love comes with conditions." The inspection continued for another hour, with Dr. Fleming questioning everything from their educational philosophy to their medical practices. By the time she left, promising a comprehensive report within the week, both Samuel and Rachel looked emotionally drained. Lucy waited until the official car had disappeared down the driveway before approaching Samuel, who was standing on the porch staring out at his fields with the weight of uncertainty on his shoulders. "They're not going to let me stay, are they?" Lucy asked quietly. Samuel turned to look at her, this brave child who had become so precious to them in such a short time. "I don't know, Lucy, but I promise you this, we won't give up without a fight. Even if it means going against everything your community believes about working with the English government." The question revealed how much Lucy had observed and understood about the delicate balance the Amish maintained with the outside world. Samuel was touched by her concern for them, even as her own future hung in the balance. "Lucy," he said, kneeling to her level, "sometimes doing what's right means taking risks. Our community understands that love doesn't recognize the boundaries that people try to put around it." That evening, as if the emotional stress of the day had summoned it, another storm rolled across Miller's Creek. This one was fiercer than the October storm that had brought Lucy to them, with winds that rattled the windows and rain that fell in sheets across the farmland. Lucy sat at the kitchen table with her school books. Rachel had been homeschooling her while they waited for the licensing decision, but her mind wasn't on arithmetic or geography. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil in her heart. For the first time in weeks, she felt the familiar fear creeping back in, the fear of being moved again, of losing the only real home she'd ever known. Goldie, now fully recovered and growing into a beautiful young dog, seemed to sense Lucy's distress. The golden retriever came and laid her head on Lucy's lap, her warm brown eyes full of the kind of understanding that only comes from shared hardship. "You're worried too, aren't you, girl?" Lucy whispered, stroking Goldie's soft ears. "You know what it's like to not have a home." Rachel looked up from her mending, having caught the sad tone in Lucy's voice. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, watching the lightning flash outside the window. Then, in a voice barely audible above the storm, she said, I lied about something. Both Samuel and Rachel gave her their full attention, but neither spoke, waiting for her to continue. When I said there was nobody, no family, I wasn't telling the whole truth. Lucy's hands twisted in Goldie's fur as she struggled with the words. There was someone. Rachel set down her sewing and moved to sit beside Lucy. Who, honey? My grandmother, my mother's mother. Her name is Helen Morrison, and she lives in Lancaster County. Lucy looked up with tears in her eyes. But she doesn't want me. The simple statement hit both Samuel and Rachel like a physical blow. The idea that any grandparent wouldn't want their grandchild was almost incomprehensible to them. What makes you think she doesn't want you? Samuel asked gently. Lucy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When my mom died 3 years ago, car accident, the social workers tried to place me with Grandma Helen, but she said she was too old, too set in her ways to raise a child. She said it wouldn't be fair to either of us. She paused, her voice becoming even smaller. She came to see me once at the first foster home. She cried a lot and said she was sorry, but she just couldn't take me in. She said I reminded her too much of my mother, and it hurt too much to look at me. Rachel felt her heart breaking for this child who had been rejected by the one person who should have loved her unconditionally. Oh, Lucy, that's why I ran away from the Hendricks, Lucy continued. Miss Crawford kept saying I should be grateful for any family that would take me, because even my own grandmother didn't want me. She said I was difficult to place because I had issues with attachment and trust. Samuel felt a surge of anger at the caseworker's cruel words, but he kept his voice calm. Lucy, sometimes adults make decisions based on their own pain and fear, not because of anything wrong with the child. Your grandmother's rejection says nothing about your worth. Lucy looked up at him with eyes that held too much wisdom for 12 years. But what if the state decides you can't keep me either? What if I have to go back to the Hendricks or to some other place where nobody really wants me? Before Samuel or Rachel could answer, the sound of a car pulling up the driveway cut through the storm. Through the rain-lashed windows, they could see headlights and the distinctive outline of Sheriff Bradley's patrol car. Samuel frowned. It was past 9 o'clock, and Tom Bradley wouldn't be making social calls in weather like this, unless something was seriously wrong. The sheriff appeared at their door, soaked to the skin, and looking grim. Sam, Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there's been a development in Lucy's case. Lucy went pale, instinctively reaching for Goldie. What kind of development? Sheriff Bradley removed his hat and accepted the towel Rachel offered him. I got a call from Mrs. Crawford about an hour ago. Apparently the Hendricks family has been investigated based on some allegations from other former foster children. The state has suspended their license pending a full inquiry. The relief on Lucy's face was immediate and visible. Does that mean? It means, the sheriff continued, that Mrs. Crawford can't send you back there, but it also complicates your placement situation. The state is now looking at emergency options. Samuel and Rachel exchanged glances. They both knew what that meant. Lucy could be moved to any available placement, potentially far from Miller's Creek, while their licensing application slowly worked its way through the bureaucracy. There's more, Sheriff Bradley said quietly. Mrs. Crawford received a phone call this afternoon from someone claiming to be Lucy's grandmother. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Grandma Helen, but how did she? Apparently she's been following your case through the state system. When she heard about your situation, about the Hendricks investigation and your placement here, she asked to be contacted. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows and the rapid beating of Lucy's heart. After 3 years of silence, why was her grandmother suddenly interested in her welfare? What did she say? Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable. She wants to meet with you, and with the Yoders. She's driving up from Lancaster County tomorrow. Lucy felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The grandmother who had rejected her, who had said she was too painful a reminder of her dead mother, was coming here. But why now? And what did it mean for her future with the Yoder family? Rachel must have seen the panic in Lucy's eyes, because she immediately pulled the girl into her arms. Whatever she wants to discuss, whatever she has to say, remember that you belong here now. That doesn't change. But even as Rachel spoke the comforting words, all three adults in the room knew that the arrival of Lucy's biological grandmother could change everything. Blood relations carried weight in the legal system that adoptive families couldn't match, no matter how much love was involved. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the Yoder kitchen, a different kind of storm was brewing. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions Lucy had carried for 3 years, but it might also bring an end to the fragile happiness she had found with the family who had chosen to love her. Samuel looked at Lucy, who was now quietly crying into Rachel's shoulder, while Goldie pressed close against her legs. This child had already endured so much loss, so much rejection. The thought that she might have to face more was almost unbearable. But there was something else in Samuel's heart, as he watched his chosen daughter struggle with this new uncertainty. A growing conviction that some fights were worth having, some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the cost. Lucy Harper had found her way to them through fire and storm, guided by love for a golden puppy and a desperate need for safety. If her grandmother thought she could simply reappear and reclaim what she had abandoned, she was going to discover just how fierce the protective instincts of an Amish family could be. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but Samuel knew that the real tempest was still to come. Tomorrow would test everything they had built together, everything they believed about love and family and the bonds that truly matter. As he helped Rachel tuck an emotionally exhausted Lucy into bed, with Goldie curled up beside her as always, Samuel made a silent promise. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever Helen Morrison had to say, Lucy would not face it alone. She was a Yoder now, in every way that mattered, and the Yoder family protected their own. The question that remained was whether love chosen would prove stronger than blood ties abandoned. By tomorrow evening they would all know the answer, and that answer would determine whether Lucy's story would have the happy ending she had never dared to dream possible, or whether it would become another chapter in the long history of a system that too often failed the children it was meant to protect. Helen Morrison arrived at the Yoder farm just as the morning mist was lifting from the fields. Lucy had been awake since dawn, sitting at her bedroom window with Goldie pressed against her side, watching the driveway with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. When the silver sedan finally appeared, her heart began to race with emotions she couldn't even name. The woman who emerged from the car was smaller than Lucy remembered, more fragile. At 68, Helen Morrison carried herself with the careful movements of someone who had learned that life could deliver unexpected blows. Her grey hair was neatly styled, and she wore a simple blue dress that spoke of modest means but careful dignity. But it was her eyes, the same deep brown as Lucy's mother had possessed, that made Lucy's breath catch in her throat. Rachel appeared beside Lucy at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She looks nervous," Rachel observed quietly. "She should be," Lucy whispered, though her own voice shook with emotion. Samuel met Helen Morrison at the front gate, his manner polite but guarded. He had spent most of the night in prayer, seeking wisdom for this encounter that could change everything for the child who had become so precious to his family. "Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said, extending his hand. "I'm Samuel Yoder. Thank you for making the trip." Helen's handshake was firm, but Samuel could feel the tremor in her fingers. "Mr. Yoder, I appreciate you agreeing to see me. I know this situation must be very difficult." "Lucy is what matters here," Samuel replied simply. "Everything else is just details." They walked toward the house together, Helen's eyes taking in the well-maintained farm, the peaceful atmosphere that seemed to emanate from every corner of the property. As they approached the porch, Lucy appeared in the doorway, Goldie at her side like a golden guardian. For a moment, both grandmother and granddaughter simply looked at each other across the space of 3 years and an ocean of hurt feelings. Helen's hand went to her throat, and Samuel could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Lucy," Helen whispered. "Oh, my dear girl, you look so much like your mother." Lucy's response was barely audible. "That's why you couldn't keep me, isn't it? Because I reminded you of her." The simple question, spoken with the directness of childhood, seemed to hit Helen Morrison like a physical blow. She took a shaky step forward, then stopped, as if unsure of her welcome. Rachel stepped out of the house, her presence immediately adding a sense of calm to the charged atmosphere. "Mrs. Morrison, please come in. I've made coffee, and I think we all have things we need to discuss." The Yoder kitchen, which had become Lucy's sanctuary, now felt like a courtroom where her future would be decided. Helen sat across from Lucy at the wooden table, with Samuel and Rachel flanking their chosen daughter like protective guardians. Goldie had positioned herself between Lucy's chair and the stranger, her intelligent eyes watchful and alert. "Lucy," Helen began, her voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know that letting you go into foster care was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I truly believed it was best for you." Lucy's voice was steady, but Samuel could see her hands trembling as she stroked Goldie's fur. "Best for me or easier for you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Helen closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Both," she admitted, "and I've regretted it every day since." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album, placing it carefully on the table. "I've followed your case through the system, every placement, every move. I knew about the problems with some of the foster families, knew you were struggling." Lucy's eyes fixed on the photo album, but she didn't reach for it. "Then why didn't you help me?" "Because I was a coward," Helen said simply. "Because every time I saw you, every time I thought about you, it felt like losing Sarah all over again." Her voice broke as she said her daughter's name. "Your mother was everything to me, Lucy. She was my whole world after your grandfather died. When she was killed in that accident, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "But Lucy needed you. She had just lost her mother too." Helen nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I know that. I knew it then, but I was drowning in my own grief, and I couldn't see past my own pain to recognize how much you were hurting." She looked directly at Lucy. "I failed you in the worst possible way. I abandoned you when you needed me most." Lucy had been listening with the careful attention of a child who had learned to read adult motivations for survival. Now she spoke, her voice carrying a maturity that should have been far beyond her years. "Why are you here now, Grandma Helen? Is it because you feel guilty or because you actually want me?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise Helen. She was quiet for a long moment, studying her granddaughter's face. The face that was indeed so much like her beloved daughter's, but marked now with experiences Sarah had never had to endure. "I'm here," Helen said finally, "because I realized something when I heard about what you've been through. I realized that my grief was selfish. I was so focused on what I had lost that I never thought about what you had lost. You lost your mother, but then you lost me too, and you've been paying the price for my cowardice ever since." She opened the photo album and turned it toward Lucy. The first page showed pictures of Sarah as a child, Lucy's mother laughing, playing, growing up in what looked like a happy, loving home. "These are your heritage," Helen said softly. "Stories about your mother that you've never heard, family history that belongs to you. I've been holding on to these memories like they were mine alone, but they're yours too." Lucy looked at the photographs, her eyes drinking in images of the mother she could barely remember. In one picture, young Sarah was holding a golden retriever puppy, her face bright with joy. "Mom had a dog like Goldie?" Lucy asked, her voice filled with wonder. Helen smiled through her tears. "Her name was Honey. Sarah loved that dog more than anything in the world. She used to say that Honey understood her better than any person ever could." For the first time since her grandmother's arrival, Lucy showed real emotion. Her fingers traced the photograph gently, connecting with this unexpected link to her mother. Samuel watched the interaction carefully. He could see the longing in Lucy's eyes, the desperate hunger for connection to her lost parent. But he could also see something else, a weariness born of too many disappointments, too many adults who had let her down. "Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said quietly, "why now? What's changed?" Helen looked up at him, recognizing the protective edge in his voice. "What's changed is that I finally understand what love really means. When I heard that Lucy had been living on the streets, that she had risked her life to save her puppy in a house fire, that she had been brave enough to survive on her own rather than stay in a bad situation, I realized that my daughter had raised an extraordinary child, a child who deserved better than the grandmother who was too weak to love her when she needed it most." She turned back to Lucy. "I'm not here to take you away from this family, Lucy. I can see how much they love you, and I can see how much you love them. I'm here to ask for your forgiveness, and to ask if there might be room in your life for a grandmother who wants to try to make up for lost time." The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Lucy looked back and forth between her grandmother and the Yoders, her young mind trying to process this unexpected turn in her story. "You don't want custody?" Lucy asked carefully. Helen shook her head. "I want what's best for you, and from what I can see, what's best for you is exactly where you are. But I was hoping that maybe I could be part of your life now. Maybe I could be the grandmother I should have been from the beginning." Rachel reached over and took Lucy's hand. "It's your choice, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, we'll support you." Lucy looked down at Goldie, who had been patiently listening to the adult conversation. The dog's warm brown eyes seemed to hold an understanding that transcended words. "Goldie," Lucy said softly, "what do you think? Should we give Grandma Helen another chance?" As if she understood the question, Goldie got up and walked over to Helen's chair. The older woman looked surprised as the golden retriever placed her head gently on her lap, looking up at her with the same accepting expression she showed everyone who was kind to her chosen family. Helen's hand moved instinctively to stroke Goldie's soft fur, and suddenly she was crying again. But these tears were different. These were tears of healing, of forgiveness granted by a dog who knew something about second chances. "I think," Lucy said slowly, "that everybody deserves a chance to make things right, even grandmothers who make mistakes." She got up from her chair and walked around the table to where Helen sat. For a moment, they looked at each other, 3 years of pain and abandonment hanging between them. Then Lucy stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's neck. "I forgive you, Grandma Helen," she whispered, "but I'm a Yoder now. This is my home, and this is my family. If you want to be part of my life, you have to understand that." Helen held her granddaughter tight, feeling the weight of redemption in the embrace of this remarkable child. "I understand," she said through her tears, "and I'm grateful, more grateful than you can possibly know." Samuel and Rachel watched the reunion with full hearts, knowing that this moment was healing wounds that had festered for too long. But more than that, they were witnessing something beautiful, a family being rebuilt not on obligation or blood alone, but on the foundation of forgiveness and chosen love. Later that afternoon, as Helen prepared to drive back to Lancaster County with promises to return soon and to be part of Lucy's life in whatever way she was welcome, she pulled Samuel aside. "Miss Yoder," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to help with your licensing process. Lucy belongs here, with you and your family. Anyone can see that." Samuel nodded his appreciation. "She's our daughter now, in every way that matters. But I'm glad she'll have you in her life too. Every child deserves to know where they came from." As Helen's car disappeared down the driveway, Lucy stood on the porch with Samuel and Rachel, Goldie at her feet. The October air was crisp and clean, washed by the previous night's storm. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked gently, slipping her arm around Lucy's shoulders. Lucy leaned into the embrace, feeling the solid strength of the woman who had become her mother in everything but name. "I think so. It feels strange, but good, like a circle that was broken has been made whole again." Samuel smiled down at his daughter. That's what forgiveness does, Lucy. It heals the broken places and makes room for new growth. That evening, as Lucy sat at the kitchen table working on her lessons, she came across something that made her pause. In her writing workbook, Rachel had asked her to write about what home meant to her. Lucy picked up her pencil and began to write. Home isn't just a place where you live. It's a place where people choose to love you, even when loving you is hard. It's a place where you're safe to be yourself, where you belong even if you're different from everyone else. I used to think I would never have a real home, but I was wrong. Home is where your family is, and family isn't just about being born to the same people. Sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other. My home is here, with Samuel and Rachel Yoder, who saved me from a burning house, and then saved me in every way a person can be saved. My home is where Goldie is safe and loved. My home is where I learned that it's okay to hope for good things, because sometimes good things really do happen to kids like me. And now my home has room for my grandmother too, because that's what real families do. They make room for love, even when it comes late. As Lucy finished writing, she felt Goldie's warm weight settle against her feet. Outside she could hear Samuel finishing his evening chores and Rachel humming softly as she prepared tomorrow's bread. These were the sounds of home. These were the sounds of a family that had chosen each other and would choose each other again every day, no matter what challenges came their way. The licensing process would continue, and there would probably be more bureaucratic hurdles to overcome. But Lucy was no longer afraid. She had learned something important in the past few weeks. Love that is freely given is stronger than any system, any rule, any obstacle that people might put in its way. She was Lucy Harper Yoder now, even if the papers didn't say so yet. She was a daughter, a sister in spirit, to the 4 grown Yoder children she had yet to meet, and a granddaughter to a woman who had learned that redemption is always possible. And she was the beloved companion of a golden retriever who had taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply love someone enough to save them from the fire. As the evening settled around the farmhouse like a gentle embrace, Lucy closed her workbook and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to grow in love and faith with the family that had become her anchor in the storm. But tonight, she was simply home, and that was everything.